Connection. Today we will be reviewing Rogue One and discussing our thoughts on the film, such as what we liked, what we disliked, and what we would do differently. I'm your host Mary, and with me are Lee and Tina.
Hi guys, I'm Lee.
Hey guys, I'm Tina.
Just to warn our listeners, spoilers are incoming. So if you haven't seen the movie yet, click off this video right now, go and see it, and we'll see you back here later. So guys, what were your initial thoughts about the movie? Did you enjoy it, and how did it compare to the rest of the saga?
So overall, I enjoyed it very much. While there wasn't a major twist in it, like, say, Luke, I am your father, there are a lot of smaller surprises that I think will please both hardcore fans and casual viewers. For me, the CGI Tarkin was probably the biggest surprise, and I really enjoyed seeing Peter Cushing resurrected from the dead and back on screen. That was pretty amazing. The greatest emotional impact for me, though, was probably the relationship between Jyn and Cassian. It was clearly laid out that, this was the romance that was never meant to be, and it really tugged at my heartstrings.
Me too. Lee?
Usually I'm the one who disagrees in this kind of discussion, and I'm going to disagree again because my heartstrings remained untugged for the most part, and that's my biggest criticism of the movie. I mean, I thought it was well done. I thought it was really good, and it's a nice addition to the story, but my critique is that there's just so much going on in a brief period, so many characters to keep track of, so I didn't really feel emotionally invested in this one as I did with the others. So I admired it from a technical standpoint. I thought it was visually very pretty, and I thought it was a story worth telling, but I didn't feel as connected to the characters as I do usually when I watch a Star Wars movie.
Oh, interesting. Do you guys think Disney succeeded in testing the waters with not only their first spin-off movie, but a more dark and more mature Star Wars film as well?
Absolutely, and I think that they really succeeded from a commercial standpoint too, because this movie has done very well already and the feedback has been really good. So I think this will give them an opportunity to continue doing standalone projects, and like I said, I think it's a worthy addition to the Star Wars universe. But and yes, they tested the water. I think they also will probably add fans that weren't a fan of the like original trilogy and the prequel trilogy. I think they can kind of join in and maybe get interested in the other film. So I think overall it was definitely hugely successful for Disney.
I would agree with that, absolutely. It's one of those movies that it truly is a standalone. You don't even have to watch the other 7 movies to really get a cohesive feel and understand what's going on within this story. That said, I absolutely loved the moral grayness of the characters. Like, right off the bat, well, Cassian is presented as one of the heroes. It's clear he's willing to kill to make sure his mission is completed and his intelligence operation isn't compromised. So this really gives me hope for the sequel trilogy as well, that not everything is in black and white, and people can have reasons for doing terrible things when they're fighting for a cause, much like a particular character in The Force Awakens. So there's that.
I completely agree, guys. Like you were saying, Lee, it's very morally grey, and we were discussing this in the Rogue One Theories podcast. I think it really shows how audiences have changed from the 70s and 80s compared to modern day now. Because in the 70s and 80s, and in the 2000s as well, the prequels and the original trilogy were very much black versus white, good versus evil. You never really saw, the rebellion doing all these terrible things. And I loved what they did with this, what you've said. It also gives me much hope for the future of the franchise. And even though I more or less knew everyone would die, part of me was worried that Disney wouldn't, to go as far as they did. So mega props for them for actually, pulling off that ending. You just know they won't be pulling any punches after this. But as for me, I really enjoyed the movie. I'd say it's my 3rd Star Wars movie after Empire Strikes Back and The Force Awakens. It definitely had its flaws. Like, for example, I went to see the film again today, and the pacing during the first act, it's so disjointed and jarring. But overall, I think it was very solid. It's definitely the best Star Wars film, visual-wise and action-wise. The cinematography of the locations and the battle scenes were amazing. I think in many ways it actually surpassed The Force Awakens in that regard. And even though I agree, I didn't really gel with the Rogue One characters, I preferred the Force Awakens characters because I think they were more interesting and had more compelling relationships. I prefer Gareth Edwards' gritty direction and straightforward telling to J.J. Abrams' over-reliant mystery boxes. So yeah, I enjoyed it. What did you think of the characters, guys?
Well, I was most surprised by Jin Erso. In the beginning, I wasn't sure if I was gonna like her or not, and then because she changes drastically throughout the story, and it all happened so quickly. But somehow it was very believable, and I think that the connection with her dad, I wish they would have explored that a little bit more. I don't think we got to see much of her and her parents, and I understand because of time constraints they couldn't do it. But I think it all hinged on her because she's the one that has the most depth to her and the one that we know most about. I feel in comparison, the other characters were underwritten, maybe. Maybe there were too many of them. Maybe it would have been better to invest in building better characters and having fewer of them, but then I can't think of who I'd write out. Somehow I think that they're all interesting in their own way. I found some portrayals unusual. I thought Riz Ahmed's character was kind of like goofy, and I don't think that worked for what he did. That took so much courage, so that kind of it struck me, and I don't know, I didn't like that. I wish that they had given him more like gravitas, but then that would have been like stereotypical fighter pilot dude, so I guess they were trying to do something different. Forrest Whitaker's character, that's another criticism I have. It's like you can't remember anybody's name unless I look them up. I can't really like think of what they're called because there's so many of them, but Forrest Whitaker's portrayal was weird. It was very different. I wasn't sure entirely what was going on there, and it seems different from what we had seen in the trailers. So it seems like there were many changes that were made over the course of maybe the original conception and then what we actually saw as the finished product. Because I remember Forrest Whitaker's character giving some dignified speech sounding sound bites in earlier trailers, and then here he came off as a little bit unhinged or paranoid, unstable, and just kind of bizarre. Cassian, I liked him, but I don't know. I liked him in a way because he's cool, but not because I know much about him. So I did like his dynamic with Jin. I just feel like overall it was kind of superficial. I just don't see how they could have done differently in a limited time. So I think they did the best they could, really.
Yeah, I would agree with that. My overall criticism as far as characters go, I didn't feel as connected with these characters as I did with the characters in The Force Awakens, and I think it really has to do with the quantity. Obviously, the sequel trilogy is the first third of a sequel trilogy, so you're going to get more connected in that sense, but still, there's still movies that have a running time of 2 hours and 15 minutes, so I think quantity was probably the biggest detractor as far as the number of characters. But that said, it does have a different feel. It is, a grittier type of war movie as opposed to The Force Awakens, which is, focuses on the more spiritual side. So that said, going back, I would say Chirrut, if I'm pronouncing that right. And just like you, Lee, I have problems too remembering everybody's names because there were so many of them, but Chirrut was probably my favorite overall. I loved how it was left ambiguous if he was actually Force sensitive or just a believer in the Force. It's very possible that he's Force sensitive, but obviously he might not be at the level of Rey, Kylo, or Luke. I think there's also a definite range of Force sensitivity that varies from person to person. He is blind, as we know, so being blind, maybe that has heightened his other senses, including his sense to the Force. And obviously we know this happens in real life, and since the Force is a very real sense in the GFFA, just like touch and smell, it could be one of those senses that increases after losing another. So I thought it was interesting that they had both a blind character that was potentially Force sensitive.
Do you know something you mentioned, Tina, about how this is a gritty war movie, and you're right, and there's less of a spiritual, like, overt theme here, but at the same time, you can kind of feel the Force kind of moving through the events here. There's a very heavy hand that it plays, and even right down to Chirrut's mantra, the Force is with me, and how he lets that guide him. So I think there is a presence there that makes it Star Wars-y, and it did feel very much like a Star Wars movie in spite of being essentially a war film. So I thought that was pretty cool how they managed to sneak that in there.
Exactly, and I loved also the overall message of hope at the end of the movie, in spite of this movie was just on the surface, it was a complete tragedy, but underneath it all, they succeeded in their mission, which was getting the Death Star plans to the rebellion. I really felt that sense of hope, sense of redemption, all of it that's really going to play a part, and it really made me even more excited where I think the direction of the sequel trilogy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree as well. You mentioned how the Force seemed to be like surrounding everything and a big part of the story, and I think that was most prominent when Chirrut was walking towards the console for the to activate the master switch so they could get word onto the rebellion, and that was a big, could obviously see the Force was working in mysterious ways there because none of the blaster bolts could hit him. Although that could be just like because stormtroopers can't hit anything really, as we all know. I really like the characters, but like you both said, I didn't find them as compelling as the Force Awakens characters, and that's probably because there were so many. My favourites were Jyn, Cassian, Chirrut, and Brody. I have to say, Jyn was wonderful. I agree completely with you there, Lee. I was really expecting one of those heroines. In movies now, heroines have to be like physically tough. They can't show emotion. They can't get involved with men because otherwise they're not considered, good, interesting heroines or role models. But no, I love the fact that she showed emotion. She seemed to have a lot of anger issues, and at first, she didn't care about either side. There was that line she said to Saw, "It's not a problem if you don't look up." I love that. I also loved that she was flawed and vulnerable, and her relationship with Cassian. Cassian, I also really liked how morally grey he was and how conflicted he was with what he'd done for the rebellion. I mean, that scene, where we're first introduced to him, really sets up the great greyness of him, and you can see on his face that when he shot his contact, he really doesn't like what he did, but he knows he had to do it in order for the rebellion and for the good cause. So that was quite interesting. And I also liked how his and Jin's relationship progressed throughout the story and how they went from being a bit snarky and not trusting each other to relying on each other. One of my favourite moments is when he saved her from Krennic. And also another character I love, Chirrut. His line, "Are you kidding me? I am blind," when Saw's men put the hood over him, made me laugh so hard. And Bodhi was so sweet. Riz Ahmed he was so charismatic. As for the others though, I mean, Baze, I didn't really care for much, even though I liked his relationship with Chirrut. But he was kind of bland on his own. And this is just a little pet peeve, but I really didn't like his costume. He looks like he was wearing something from Ghostbusters. He did, honestly. But I also wish that they had a bit more of a focus on Jyn and Galen's relationship, like you said. While I understand that they did what they did, and it was really interesting seeing the rebellion get their hands dirty, when they killed Galen, I just wish we could have seen more of it. I mean, like my friend who I went to see the film with today, she brought up the point that maybe it would have been more interesting if Galen was director, the actual director of the Death Star, and maybe the confrontation and conflict there would have been a bit more interesting. But that kind of mirrors Luke and Vader, so I'm not sure about that. But the biggest problem with characters was Saw. He was so underwhelming.
Yeah.
I thought he was going to play a bigger role and be Jin's mentor, similar to Obi-Wan with Anakin and Luke and Han with Rey. But I don't even know how to describe it, how underwhelming it was.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with that. I mean, we didn't even get to see him interacting with Jyn much. We just had to take it, they basically were just giving a lot of exposition. They were telling us, he dumped me and I was 16 or whatever, and I haven't seen him since. It was like, really? It would have been nice to have a dynamic there.
Yeah, and I didn't really understand his death. I mean, for someone who was so committed to the cause, going out the way he did, I just thought it made no sense personally.
Yeah, I guess they were trying to say that because he lost everything and he knew that Jyn was going to take over, and lead the rebellion or whatever. He felt okay with, and he couldn't walk really quickly because he had, I don't know, prosthetic feet or whatever. But it was just, the whole arc was just kind of bizarre and underwhelming. And speaking of underwhelming, I have a real problem with Krennic. I was expecting this guy to be, based on the cape, I guess. And some of the images that we saw of him, I was expecting him to be badass. And he just came out like a social climber, super ambitious guy who's not very competent and not very good at his job. And I just did not like him at all. I was expecting more from him. And I don't think the actor's portrayal was bad. I think he was great, but I think the character was not what I had hoped.
I completely agree with that assessment. Krennic was probably my biggest disappointment because, like I said, in the trailers and the promotion for the movie, the cape, you thought, the way he was dressed, he just looked so badass, so confident in what he was doing, and so fearsome that when we actually meet him, he's just kind of this like social climber ass kisser. And
exactly.
Huge disappointment.
I'm sorry,
I'm
go
going to
ahead.
disagree with you guys. I really am. When Krennic first came out and it was first announced and all the trailers came out, I was not excited about him at all. He was probably like the least character I was the character I was least interested in. And there were loads of like people going crazy over him, and I was just like, what? I don't care. But I actually really liked how snobby and incompetent he was, because we've had some Grand Moffs like that in the Legends continuity, but not in the current Disney canon. And we've got Darth Vader, who's quite fearsome. We've got Tarkin, who's the biggest of the Grand Moffs. Everyone respects him, including Vader. And we've also got Thrawn now in Star Wars Rebels, who is the absolute master planner, and he's also fearsome in his own right. So to have a Grand Moff or a villain who is basically an ass kisser, I really liked it, because it showed his flaws, how terrible he was at his job. It was just like a very nice contrast there. So I liked Krennic despite everything. I liked him because of that.
Well, I'm glad he has one fan. I'm kidding. I know a lot of people liked him. But, I think...
I wouldn't call myself a fan. I just liked him.
Do you know, I think that actually the whole Krennic thing is part of my biggest criticism of the movie, is that the whole connections thing. Like, one of the things I love about Star Wars is how you feel how the characters are connected to each other and you connect to them. And that's missing in Rogue One. So Krennic's whole arc is basically, notice me, senpai. Like, the whole time, he's like, will you mention it to the Emperor? And you'll tell the Emperor? Like, he's just like, he doesn't care about anything else. He just wants the Emperor to notice him. Meanwhile, the whole thing with Jyn, she is caring about the rebellion because of her dad, and she's connected to him, but it doesn't, there's no meat there, It's like her whole connection to the cause of the rebellion feels very tenuous. If she hadn't had that moment with her dad, she would still not care if she hadn't seen the hologram. And then we don't know what everybody else is fighting. I mean, we know because they told us, but we don't see it. So it doesn't feel like they're really connected to each other in a strong way, or you don't get a sense that there's anything really driving them that's real. It's just like, oh yeah, they're all fighting to defeat the Emperor, but I don't know, I feel like it was missing like an emotional anchor, if that makes any sense to you guys.
No, it does. Yeah. And I agree with with some of what you're saying, but with Krennic, basically the only thing that was important to him was power. That's all he ever wanted. And I know that could be a bit cliche, but compared to characters like Tarkin, Vader, and Thrawn, I really enjoyed it, because they don't openly show that they want power, while Krennic is all over it. But what you were saying about Jyn, that was one of the things that I was quite worried about going into the film. But the more I watched the film, the more I kind of realized that I don't think she had any hope initially, which is why she said, it's not a problem if you don't look up. But I think when she saw, the hologram of her father, that gave her hope. It gave her the hope that she needed to fight and become committed to the cause. So even though, yes, it would have been nice to have more meat in that story, I could see why she suddenly changed her loyalties. And even though the rebellion was responsible for the death of her father, she understood, that she needed to be part of the rebellion, or become part of it, essentially, in order to free the galaxy.
Yeah, and you're right. And I guess my criticism is that she's fighting for her father's ideals, and I wish that they had been hers. I just wish that it had come from her, from inside of her, rather than her just attaching herself to this cause because her father would have wanted it. But still, I think that there's a lot of sincerity there on Jyn's part. That's not the biggest flaw by far. I think they still did a great job with her character, but I see what you mean.
I think they did a great job with Jyn, but I gotta agree on that assessment. The relationship she had with her father, Galen, it didn't have the emotional impact I was looking for. And I think it just comes down to, they're trying to cram so much into a 2-hour movie that they run out of time trying to build this emotional bond between them, and it gets lost in translation.
Yeah.
Fair enough. So, which scenes stood out to you the most, and which ones didn't?
For me, I gotta say it was what stood out to me most, and this is just me because I'm an OT fan through and through, would be Vader on Mustafar. I think it's interesting to me how a simple location can lead to so much speculation on why he chose to have his castle there. If we remember, this is the place where he both killed his beloved wife and where Obi-Wan defeated him in possibly the most painful way possible. It's like he literally confined himself to his own living hell. And then here's another question. Did he pick this place himself, or did the Emperor choose it for him out of either punishment or as a way to keep him on the dark side?
The latter. It's been confirmed.
Okay.
That the Emperor chose it for him to keep him fueling his hatred. I think that was in the Rogue One encyclopedia that's just come out.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, because that was my first question when I saw it in the movie. I'm like, that's an interesting place for him to choose to have, his personal lair, I guess if you would call it that.
I agree. The location in the sequel trilogy, I want them to go there. Like maybe Rey and Kylo Ren, or Rey and Luke. Whoever, I want someone in the sequel trilogy to go there.
Absolutely.
I want to see Kylo Ren fangirling over Vader stuff.
I know. With Rey at his side, it's like his wet dream. But going back, though, I would say my least favorite scene is probably where the Empire takes out all of the scientists, minus Galen, just to prove a point. From a strategical standpoint, this is ridiculous. I'm not even sure that in a galaxy far, far away, that minds of that caliber, they're not something you're going to find every day. Scientists at that level. I know in Catalyst that this was explored further, that it was said that this was routine for the Empire, that every time they would finish, a major undercover project, they would kill everyone that worked on it. So these were already dead men walking, but at the same time, I found it... I don't know a better word for it. I would say wasteful. That they would do this, just so secrets wouldn't get out. It just seemed a little bit over the top.
That's interesting because when I saw that scene, I thought Krennic was just doing it to cover his tracks. He just wanted to make sure to keep everything contained, and he didn't really care about the great minds and how they could further help the Empire. It's just another example of him being self-serving and being focused on, gotta impress the Emperor. Yeah. But but I see what you mean. That's a good point. Well, for me, my favorite scene has got to be Vader when he ignites the lightsaber and just goes on a rampage. I am going to watch the movie again. I've only had a chance to see it once just because of that montage. I just loved it. And, Darth Vader is my favorite character. So it was just, amazing for me to see. I think they did it incredibly well. And I love how you get the sense that, oh my God, everybody's trying so hard to get those plans to Princess Leia. And you know where they're headed. So I think it was just a really nice treat for fans of the original trilogy to see it all come full circle. I thought it was incredibly well done. As far as my least favorite scene and my least favorite character, I would have to say it's Jin's mom. I thought that it was incredibly dumb to basically just go on a suicide mission. Did she really expect that she was going to change the outcome of Galen being taken by the Empire just because she would confront Krennic? I thought it was wasteful, like you said, Tina. She could have stayed with her daughter and raised her. She could, I feel like she shouldn't have done that. It was all for nothing, and it was dumb. So it really bugged me. And I also thought that she was kind of mean anyway. She was like, don't hug her anymore. I know she was trying to get people to escape, but I just found her annoying. And she was there for a short time. So she did make an impact on me. I was just like, I can't believe this character. So yeah.
That would be probably another criticism I would have too, is just the way, and mothers don't have a good track record anyway, either in the original trilogy, in the prequels.
Exactly.
Whatever. They get the worst of the worst. Look at Leia in the sequel trilogy. That poor girl, she probably gets the brunt. Her husband is killed by her son. And it's terrible. It's terrible. Padme, Vader chokes Padme and she dies, and she supposedly dies of a broken heart, which that's a whole nother conversation for another time. But
exactly.
Yeah, it's just, it's keeping up with that track record about sidelining mothers in the Star Wars universe.
It's interesting that you say that about mothers, and even though I know it's true and I don't like it, my friend offered a very good point today. One of her major criticisms was, the relationship between Galen and Jin, and she said she thinks it would have worked a lot more if Lyra was a scientist who created the Death Star. She would have liked to have seen, a mother-daughter relationship in the film.
I agree.
And she also said maybe it would have been a bit more interesting if Lyra took Director Krennic's role as well.
Absolutely. I mean, a mother-daughter relationship, replacing Galen as the mother, that wouldn't need any changes to the story whatsoever, but it would give us something, fresh that we haven't seen before.
Yeah, I agree as well, but to be fair, we've not really seen, a father-daughter relationship in the movies. I mean, Vader was Leia's father, but that, as we all know, that was a quick, shoehorned-in moment in the Return of the Jedi, because Leia was never meant to be Luke's sister in the first place. We did have a couple of father and daughter relationships in the Legends continuity, most notably the one between Han Solo and Jaina Solo, but that's it. So part of me is glad that there was a father-daughter relationship in this film.
Yep, I agree with that. That at least is something new that we haven't seen.
Yeah. What I loved most about the movie was that whole third act. Its pacing was perfect, and especially in comparison to that dreadful first act. And despite us all knowing the outcome, they managed to make it so tense and brutal. Jyn and Cassian dying on the beach was absolutely beautiful. I think the slow descent of all the characters, such as KS2O, defending Jyn and Cassian from the stormtroopers, Chiru and Baze and Brody, before the grenades were launched at them and before they were shot, etc. It was just this slow descent of them realizing, oh God, we're not going to survive, which was so heartbreaking. And,
oh my gosh, I was in tears at that part. I was sitting between my mom and my husband, and my mom's trying to hug me in the theater because I'm about to bawl.
Yeah, it was really emotional.
Yeah.
And I'm going to agree with you both. Vader's cameo was awesome. I mean, I loved the castle, the design of his castle and how he puts Krennic in his place. He's just shut up, stop being a whiner. And I agree, Lee. His scene at the end was amazing, and it was terrifying as well. It was like something out of a horror movie. And sorry, going back to everybody dying, the fact that Disney actually had the guts to do it, I'm so impressed. I think that was my favorite moment of the film, despite the fact that it was sad.
Well, I agree with you there. Yeah.
My least favorite thing about the movie, and I'm gonna disagree with you completely here, Tina. CGI Tarkin and Leia. I hated them so much. They look, it was impressive in its own right. I do acknowledge that for them to do that, but at the same time, they looked like something out of a video game, and the illusion was really, especially shattered when they started talking. You could really see the CGI-ness effects then.
I agree with you, Mary. I fully agree with you. I think that they were overambitious there. They did a great job. And if they had used the CGI, but a little bit more sparingly, maybe not have been directly facing the camera and talking kind of thing, it would have been more convincing for me. Because as soon as Leia, especially when she smiled, it looked so phony. It was not. It looked janky.
I definitely agree with that.
It was not a good look.
The whole cinema in my theater laughed when Leia turned around and smiled. Everybody laughed. It was so awkward. But I agree with you, Lee. I think, there were a couple of shots of Tarkin, with his head turned towards the camera. And you could see, shots of, just his reflection on the window. I think maybe if they had done that throughout the movie and kept him in shadow, it would have been a lot more effective. Yeah. And I think they should have just kept Leia's hood on at the end and just had that, Carrie Fisher's voice play over her. It would have been far less distracting.
Yeah, they could have had her hand, grasping the plans and, just have the voice and whatever. But I think they went all out, and I don't think that the technology is, that advanced to allow for that to be done convincingly. I think they should have waited a few years before attempting that.
Well, this is a different topic. This is another topic entirely, but it also makes me think, well, I know this has been brought up in, articles about the movie. Will CGI grow, so good that we'll be able to replace them with actors in the future? That's, that would be an interesting topic. But anyway.
Yeah, I kind of hope that doesn't happen. But...
Me too. I was thinking that.
Just me. Like I said, I really did enjoy Tarkin just because I was shocked that they actually went there. And, I can't believe that this happened, but I went in relatively spoiler-free. Shockingly, I'm still not sure how that happened, but I did, and I didn't know anything about Tarkin, that they were going to be doing that with Tarkin, and when I thought when I saw him, I'm like, oh my gosh, they actually went there, and I was actually very excited by it. I thought it was neat. I guess maybe I was trying to stop myself from looking for flaws because I knew I'd find them if I looked too hard, and I just kind of wanted to try to enjoy seeing Peter Cushing on the big screen again. I'm gonna go see it again this weekend. We'll see if my initial reaction holds up. It might not. So we'll see.
Let us know on that. Which ties into our next point. What else would you guys have done differently?
For me, I would say Saw Gerrera dying so quickly. This is probably one of the characters I didn't know a whole lot about him going in, but I saw the potential that character could have had. First of all, he's an extremist on the side of the rebellion, which makes him interesting right off the bat, just based on that alone. I think I was hoping he would have a much bigger role, and it also seemed like a huge waste of such a huge acting talent like Forrest Whitaker. And again, I think this goes back to, just having introduced less characters overall. But if there was a character that they would keep and maybe, gives more background on him and keep him in for the movie longer, he would definitely be the ones I would pick to keep. I think that, him being an extremist on the rebellion, he's basically Vader's antithesis. He's being kept alive by machinery, and yet he's fighting for the side of the rebellion, but, from a very extremist point of view. And which again makes me, very excited about the sequel trilogy, introducing more gray and even, like charcoal characters like Saw Gerrera.
Nicely put. I agree with that. The thing I would change would be that I would streamline things a little bit better. So I feel like they went to too many places and did too many things that maybe weren't essential. And I think that if they had used that extra time to develop the characters a little bit more, that would have had a bigger impact. I think my big criticism of this, and I've said it several times, that it feels a little bit impersonal. It feels like you're just watching this happen to these people, but I feel like it could have packed a big emotional punch if they had invested a little bit more time in character development. So I think to that end, I would have added more scenes between Jyn and her dad, either as when she was a kid before Krennic comes along, or her remembering, which, Rogue One was the first Star Wars movie to not have a crawl, so I think they could have been the first one to have a flashback. I think that would have added a lot to that connection between Jyn and her dad. So that's my main criticism, and the thing I would have changed would be just developing the characters a little bit better, and maybe at the expense of cutting back on action sequences a little bit.
No, interesting. I actually agree with what you've said. I would have cut back a bit. I think maybe the character I would have lost would have been Baze, because I think he was the least interesting one. I think maybe if Chirrut was on his own, it would have been a bit better. More of a character to focus on, because throughout the movie you get hints that they're really good friends and that they've been together for a while, but we don't really know anything. There could have been a scene where maybe they explained that why Baze was what he was, why he always followed Chirrut around, and so that was a bit disappointing. I would have also I really, really agree with what you said about maybe opening up with a flashback. That would have been really interesting, because I know in the movie, you see a flashback when Jyn is dreaming about, I think it alludes to Catalyst, maybe. You see Galen in Imperial garb, and with Krennic, and with the mother, Jyn's mother, whose name I can't pronounce at the minute. So that would have been interesting, seeing more of that and setting up Krennic's relationship with Galen and why he really wanted him back, which they kind of just skipped over in the opening credits. Moving on, I would have there's been hints that Jyn and Cassian kissed in the elevator. I would have liked to have seen that personally, but other than that, again, I would have really liked it if Saw had a bigger role. I think it would have been really interesting if he refused Jin's offer to help the rebellion and say, no, I don't like the way they fight, like pretty much like they don't like the way me fight, and he could have just, be on your way. And then he would have turned up at Scarif at the end to fight the good fight and protect Jyn from either Krennic or Vader on Scarif. And I think it really would have been poetic if Vader had been the one to kill Saw, because he helped him defend his planet against the Separatists in the Clone Wars and fight an oppressive regime, only to be part of another oppressive regime and kill him. And I don't know, even though I loved Vader's cameo at the end, I kind of also wish he had a confrontation with at least one of the main group So maybe Baze could have died defending Cassian and Jin from him, or maybe Chirrut. But my biggest change, which I would have made to the movie, was, and I forgot to bring this up before, one of the things I really loved about this movie was how diverse the cast was. I mean, you had women and men of all colour, and it felt really natural. But I really wish there had been more women in the film. And if it were up to me, I would have made Chirrut and Bodhi women, and maybe cast Michelle Yeoh and Gold Sharifti Farahani. I'm pretty much butchering her name, but she's the lady who stars with Adam Driver in Patterson. She's a fantastic actress. Because there's always one woman in a group of men in these types of movies. I mean, you have Leia with Han and Luke. You've got Rey with Finn, Poe, and Han, and you've also, like Harry and Hermione, Harry, Ron, and Hermione in Harry Potter, and Katniss, Peter, and the other fella in the Hunger Games. You always just have one woman, so it would have been more interesting to see more women in that film and see a bit of a relationship between them, because Chirrut and Jin had a bit of an understanding in the film, which I really liked. And maybe just to focus a bit more on certain characters, like, we've said this before, instead of trying to stretch out a bit much. But that's pretty much what I would have changed.
Yeah, I really like that idea of having more camaraderie between girls and women in Star Wars. We've certainly had our fair share of bromances, which are awesome. I mean, going back to the PT, we see it with Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon Jinn, and with Obi-Wan and Anakin later on. In the original trilogy, Chewie and Han are bros for life, right? We see it in Luke and Han. In Rogue One, we have Chirrut and Baze, and we have Cassian and his droid. In the sequel trilogy, we see it with Poe Dameron and Finn, but we haven't really seen that between women, and it would be awesome if they included that at some point. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen with Rey, but it seems like she's also going to be the one girl. But
well, yeah. Of course, there's Kelly Marie Tran, who's coming up in episode 8, so hopefully in episode 9 they might tilt and become friends.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree that female characters are... the Star Wars franchise is definitely lacking female friendships or building upon that. It seems to be all about the bromance, and that is something that, I would like to see as well. And, with Kelly Marie Tran's character coming up, I am hopeful for that. Going back to... your point about the potential kiss in the elevator. I just want to say, Mary, that I think it's interesting they chose not to show a kiss between Jin and Cassian. I mean, by doing so, it really drives home the point that this was a romance cut short, and you still understand the point that's being driven home by camera angles and, the lingering looks, and it really is all about what could have been. You also have, of course, the League of Future Generations that never had a chance, which is even more tragic than the romance between Jin and Cassian never coming to fruition. It's, to that point, it's actually the exact opposite of the generation of Skywalkers, which, everybody knows will likely continue into infinity. It's like Jin and Cassian were amongst those that sacrificed themselves so the Skywalker could indeed continue and bring balance to the Force. On the flip side of this, of course, there's always those out there that, insist there's no romance in Rogue One, which to me, that's always irritating. Gosh, I experience the same phenomenon with TFA, and it never gets less annoying, when people are telling you, yeah, there was no romance between these characters. So that's just me.
Well,
No,
I agree. And I find it refreshing that, there wasn't a kiss. There was a hint of a romance, but it didn't come to pass, like you say. For me, that pretty much guarantees that we are going to see a romance in the sequel trilogy, and we will get a great kiss. Maybe that's just wishful thinking, but, I mean, come on.
I think we will get 2 good kisses in the sequel trilogy. Yeah, I definitely agree. Well, sorry, I definitely see where you're coming from, Tina. And I think it is really interesting that they didn't put a kiss in. But I think for me, I really would have liked the kiss just for selfish reasons. Because like you said, we are having people who are saying, oh, there was nothing going on between Jin and Cassian, when there really was.
Yeah, and I swear it's Groundhog's Day.
Yes, and I wish that the kiss had happened just so they could shut up. Which, another point to add, when I first watched the movie, I couldn't appreciate Jin's death properly, tragic despite it was, because I was very happy that the Sky Mum theory had been well and truly debunked. Yes.
That's my response.
Okay, here's a couple of theories we got right from our previous podcast, Rogue One Theories and Predictions. We predicted that there was a chance that everyone would die, but let's face it, pretty much everyone did, and everybody and their mother knew that. I just don't think they expected it to be the way it was, and how epic it was. Turns out that the Death Star is indeed powered by kyber crystals. Well done to Irina on that theory. She and Rhea were also right about Saw being a real extremist and breaking away from the rebellion because of this. And when Mon Mothma confirmed this in the film, I had the biggest smile on my face because of that. And we were also right about Cassian and Jyn having a background romance of sorts and dying together, as well as Krennic and Galen being on two sides of the same coin, and Lyra dying very early on in the film.
Not bad, guys. You did a great job.
Yeah, that's a really great track record. You did better than I did.
Thank you. So, is there anything else you'd like to add that you haven't thought of before?
I guess I would just say that even though I've criticized the movie a lot and I've said blah blah blah, it still is they did a great job. And we have to remember that one of the advantages that The Force Awakens and all of the previous Star Wars movies have is that with the exception of A New Hope, of course, is that they've had this preset universe, and the characters, you kind of know who they are going in, right? So they don't just appear out of nowhere. They're already kind of built in to be inserted into the story, and you know what they're about, so you already kind of like them even before you know them. And that's true of Rey, that we identify her as the Luke in the movie, right? And Kylo Ren as the Darth Vader wannabe, and we kind of it's easy to start liking them. With Rogue One, I mean, they're coming out of nowhere, unless you read Catalyst, which I didn't, and I know a lot of people didn't. And it really takes a lot for the character to come out of nowhere and build a character from scratch and have people actually care about them dying or living or do what they got to do. So I think they had a very unique challenge to Rogue One as a standalone film, and I think that they did a really good job.
Yep, I would definitely agree with that assessment. So I really don't have anything to add. I think that sums it up.
Yeah, good. Couple of things I wanted to add. Number one, I would have definitely made the first act of that movie less choppy, more flowing. So yes, agree with what you said before. Less, visits to planets, and maybe have more, one location in the first act, or maybe one or two. So it could maybe flow better instead of just this really, really fast pace where we can't settle in properly. Because it took me until the second act to really get into the characters and realize who was who compared to the first part.
I agree. The planet jumping lost me a couple of times, and like I said, I really am looking forward to my second viewing just because I think that'll be helpful, as far as putting the pieces together. The overall story was very easy to understand, but there's so many nuances that I think you missed the first time that they've thrown in there that I think I need a second viewing to appreciate it.
Yeah, the chopping gets really apparent when you go for a second viewing, believe me. And just one more point, adding on to what we were discussing about more women being in the film earlier. There are great female friendships again in the Legends continuity, and also in the new canon as well. I mean, you have Leia and Mara Jade in Legends. You also have Leia and her old handmaiden Winter in Legends, and Mara and Jaina and Tenel Ka as well. And you also have Leia and Yvonne, the blonde lady in the new comics, in the new canon comics as well. And you also, I suppose you could also say, we have Ahsoka and maybe her friendship turned betrayal with Barriss, and she likes Padme as well. But this is the thing; they're all in different. They're all in different canon, different medias essentially. You never really see it in the movies, which are the more important aspects of the Star Wars franchise, because the general audience, sees them as opposed to all the cartoons. I mean, they rarely read the books as well. So that's why it would be more prominent if there were female friendships and more female characters in the movies.
That's a great point. Well, I'd just like to add, I hope that Disney learned something from the response to Rogue One, and that they can use those lessons to better guide their episode 8 and 9 installments. I think that we love great action and beautiful cinematography, of course, but we really want character development, and I personally would be willing to sacrifice some action sequences for the sake of that. And I also think that it would be really important to include a great kiss, and for Disney to realize that if things are not telegraphed and written in bold, underlined, and highlighted on screen, it's just going to fly over the heads of a lot of the audience members. So really just make it as clear as possible if you want people to take home a message. Like a romance, for example. We need a romance in Star Wars. And yeah, and other than that, I would say that, and this is just speaking for myself, I hope Disney took note that there is a great director available in case Colin Trevorrow royally screws up episode 9 and then they can replace him, because I am very worried about that. But that's another topic for another time.
Yes, I agree. Gareth, especially like with them, one of the other things that I didn't say, but I loved the battle scenes. I think they're the best battle scenes in the whole franchise, because it was so tension-packed and thrilling, and you could see what was going on. And of course, Gareth Edwards is also very good at directing characters. So yeah, if Colin Trevorrow pulls out, please, 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 Kathleen Kennedy, put Gareth Edwards as the new director of Episode 9. Please, please, please.
Yeah, I agree. I thought he was great. I had my reservations about Trevorrow as well. Just like anybody, he's not very kind to when it comes to writing female characters. So that said, I know Kathleen Kennedy has her eyes on everything. So I'm a little more hopeful, I think, than other folks as far as what's going to happen in 9 and her input. If he goes way out of left field, at least she'll be there to guide him back to where he needs to be. But as anything, we'll see.
So last part, what would you rate Rogue One out of 10? I can't decide if it's a 7 or an 8.
I would say, for me, 7. I'm taking points off for the characterization and the story. I think there's just too much going on, but I'm giving a good score because it was just a great movie.
For me, I'd probably go, if we're talking about the first 2/3 of the movie, I'd go with a 7. If we're talking about the last third of the movie, I'd go with a 9. As you stated, Mary, previously, these characters, were a little more well-developed. I was a little more attached to them, particularly the relationship between Cassian and Jyn. That scene on the beach, I think that's going to go down in cinematic history as a very iconic scene.
Along with
that just really, that hammered, what was a pretty good movie to a great movie. So that's my assessment.
Along with Vader's cameo, I think that will also go down in cinematic history.
Yes, which also happened to be in the last third of the movie.
Yeah, so. I think the whole third act will go down as one of the greatest third acts in cinema history, especially in Star Wars history.
Yep.
Okay, I think we've covered everything we wanted to. Thank you to Lee and Tina for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the movie and our review. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Twitter, Tumblr, and Mixcloud. If you have any questions, please email us at starwarsconnection09@gmail.com. We hope you will join us again in 2017. So until then, have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year from us here at Star Wars Connection.